The icy wind howled through the valleys of Maple Hill, whistling as it tangled itself in the wooden slats of a weather-beaten barn. Inside, the old farmer, Joe Henderson, remained unaware of the swirling chaos outside. His calloused hands worked deftly, wrapping hay bales in thick twine, the familiar scent of grassy sweetness filling his nostrils. He had poured years into this land of planting, nurturing, and harvesting, all in passion and toil. But tonight, the wind carried whispers of something darker. A solitary figure approached the edge of the forest, her breath visible against the cold. Claire, only 20, but wielding a burden of desperation that aged her beyond her years, darted glances toward the barn. Nearby, muddy footprints trailed behind her, clear evidence that she wasn't alone. She drew in a breath and signaled to the others, hidden among the trees like phantoms in the night. The air was thick with tension, the stillness of the farm a deceptive mask. Inside the barn, the only sound for Joe was the soft creak of wood as he worked. To him, these walls were a fortress, keeping out the storms and the shadows of the world. He had poured blood, sweat, and tears into building this life, but he was unprepared for the storm that was about to collide with his sanctuary. As the clock struck midnight, a sudden crash echoed through the stillness, splintering the night air. The barn door burst inward, and in an instant, chaos unfolded. Shadows flooded in, cloaked in hooded jackets, eyes glinting with the gleam of malicious intent. Claire led the group inside, heart racing, adrenaline flooding her veins. They had come seeking refuge, but emotions ran high, and desperation had a way of warping intentions. A voice barked, low and menacing, reverberating against the barn walls. Joe's heart hammered in his chest as he spun around, eyes wide, confusion settling in. He had heard the stories of thieves and desperate souls roaming the outskirts, but they had always been mere tales, distant and unreal. "Get out," Joe's voice boomed, thick with authority. It echoed off the wooden beams, surprising him as much as it startled the intruders. Years of raising livestock and running a farm had forged his will, made him strong. But now, faced with violence and fear, he felt a flicker of vulnerability. Claire felt the weight of guilt as she observed the man before her. He was nothing more than a tired old farmer, worn but resolute. She had not expected this confrontation, not against a man who had fought for his family, his livelihood. She had been to the brink, lost her job, her home. It was all leading her to this rude awakening. Still, panic surged within her. They were outnumbered, and the tension melted into something primal. One of the intruders took a menacing step forward, eyes narrow and voice razor-sharp. "Listen, old man, we're not here to play games." Confidence dripped from his words, a facade that masked his own uncertainty. People could only push others so far before they realized the true nature of their surroundings. Joe stood firm, refusing to let fear topple his resolve. His mind raced, searching for an ally in this moment of chaos. It was then that he remembered the old metal toolbox tucked away in the corner. He had always prepared for storms, be it the weather or the unpredictability of life. He didn't believe in lost causes. Each moment was born from the depths of confidence. He motioned toward the back end, where the old tractor sat, rusty and proud. There was a sudden stillness, the buzzing power of the moment floating between them. Yet Claire was only drawn deeper into her conflict. They had all decided to turn to this ill-advised plan, but the reality of it was constricting. Did they really see what they were about to rob? They were endangering a man whose life was etched into the very walls around them. She felt a stirring of something inside her, a flicker of morality. It battled fiercely with her desperation. Joe took a breath, both bold and strategic. "I don't want any trouble. I've got tools, machinery. You can walk out of here with something of value." His eyes locked onto Claire's, searching for some semblance of understanding in her eyes. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. The brash confidence of the intruders began to waver, a flicker of uncertainty dancing amidst their bravado. It was the visceral bond of humanity beneath layers of desperation. Joe could see it, the doubt creeping into their eyes, making him realize they were not so different. They were all fighting, just in different ways. The tension thickened like fog as Claire weighed her choices. Her heart wrestled, both fleeing from the fear and urging her towards empathy. The shadows around them shrunk. She glanced at her accomplices, who stared back, equally torn. She could sense the weight of their desperation, too. They needed to run, but there was an inkling there, something profound that tied them all together. She stepped forward, every heartbeat echoing the truth that she dared to confront. "You're right." The others turned to her, surprise and confusion pouring out of their expressions, momentarily overshadowing the bravado. Joe's posture softened as he scrutinized her brave face. It was never easy to admit vulnerability, especially in a scene grounded in fear and uncertainty. "Then let's walk away," he said, hopeful but cautious. "We can find another way." The relentless grip of night began to release, the stars peeking through the patches of clouds. The barn walls bore witness, strong and sturdy, echoing the shift in mood. Fear became choice, bravado morphed into awakening. They realized they were all part of the same storm, navigating a treacherous path. "Just leave the way you came," Joe urged. He could feel the fiery warmth of hope bubbling within him. They were all people who wanted to survive, but the path they were on led nowhere good. With a subtle shift, the shadows began to recede, and the realities of desperation morphed into compassion. Claire turned back to her friends, her voice firm yet imploring. This isn't who we are. With a silent nod, her group retreated to the wooden door, uncertainty still dancing in their eyes but regret beginning to settle in their hearts. As they walked away, a quiet understanding settled between Joe and Claire. Their lives were carved from different woods, but at the core, they both knew a fire when it flickered around them. The harsh wind continued to howl outside, but what lingered within the barn was an echoed promise, one of compassion and new beginnings. Joe watched as they disappeared into the distance, leaving behind the uncertainty like shadows chased away by dawn. The barn felt warmer now, filled with the enriched air of hope moving forward. Moments later, Joe felt a weight lifted as he returned to his work. He wouldn't abandon the fight against adversity, the strength of his heart rapid and fierce, allowing him to navigate life's unpredictability with grace. And in that space of understanding, fear became a choice transformed by courage, illuminating the path home. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the farmland, the old barn stood still, a lone sentinel against the coming night. Inside, Farmer Tom Whitmore moved with purpose. The crisp autumn air swirled outside, rattling the barn doors and teasing the fading daylight. Tom had always been a man to prepare, his life, his work, his every step on this land shaped by routines and responsibility. But tonight, the winds carried more than just whispers, they brought a foreboding chill. Just as Tom climbed atop a stack of hay bales to secure a loose roof shingle, he heard it, the unmistakable crunch of gravel underfoot. His instincts, honed by years of solitude and vigilance, kicked into overdrive. Clearly, he wasn't alone tonight. He stepped cautiously into the dim light, peering out through the barn door. Shadows moved swiftly, 5 figures cloaked in darkness, their breath visible in the cold night air. They were even closer now, their presence a jagged twist to the calm evening. Tom's heart raced, but his mind whirled even faster. Intruders, thieves, what did they want? He didn't have much in the way of cash, but years of investment could yield far more than a few bills. The tractor sat in the corner, rusting yet sturdy, and every piece of equipment out there signified the sweat he had poured into this farm. He could almost hear the voices of his ancestors urging him to defend what was his. Suddenly, a guttural shout broke through the tension. Get in there. Tom's blood ran cold. The gang surged toward the barn, their movements strong and determined. But beneath their bravado, he sensed fear, a fear that usually drove one to desperate acts. With adrenaline surging, Tom dipped back inside, scanning the dimly lit space. His eyes landed on the toolbox. Over the years, it had become as much a part of the barn as the wooden beams overhead. This was no ordinary toolbox. It was full of tools that had kept his dreams alive, each one a testament to labor and grit. He had often thought about how it could also serve as a last line of defense. He grabbed a hammer, solid, weighty, and familiar. Let them come, he thought. He prepared himself. All those years of hard work had equipped him not just with tools for farming, but also with resolve. Could he use that same grit to protect it all? The barn door burst open with a loud bang. The intruders flooded in, an explosion of dark clothing and wild eyes. Tom stood unwavering, hammer at the ready, but calmly anchoring his mind to the reality of the situation. They could be dangerous, yes, but they were also foolish to underestimate him. One of them sneered, looking Tom up and down as if he were merely an old man with a rusted implement. But Tom stood tall, his posture firm and unyielding. This is my home. For a moment, the tension swelled to a breaking point. The intruders hesitated, glancing at each other, looking for leaderly reassurance. This unspoken communication spilled the beans. They weren't here for a fight, they wanted to rob, to intimidate, and perhaps to claim what couldn't be theirs. Years of grit didn't just stem from toil and sweat, they bled into his soul, carving out a man who wouldn't yield easily. You don't know what you're messing with. Tom's voice thundered, every word like an echo from the heavens. It turned heads and cast a sudden weightiness into the air. Just give us the money, old man. Another shouted, more desperate now, eyeing the toolbox in Tom's grip. They were close, but Tom could see the cracks forming in their facade. Each had an edge of panic that fluttered behind their bravado. They felt out of place, part of something disastrous that loomed ahead like a storm cloud ready to consume them. Planning for trouble is sometimes half the battle, Tom mused quietly to himself, remembering his father's old sayings. In one sudden move, he swung the hammer toward the ground, producing a resounding smacking sound that reverberated in the confines of the barn. Get out now, and I won't call the police. The weight of his words filled the air, and for a split second, he watched disbelief flicker on their faces. They weren't criminals, they were scared, driven by choices they'd made at a crossroads. Bravado faded further as Tom kept his grip firm. The hammer was more than just a tool, it was a symbol of his steadfastness. Just a few quick bucks, old man, the leader said, voice wavering. The mask of bravado was cracking, revealing the truth, a deep-rooted fear of failure that the gang could only mask so long. Trust me, there are easier targets out there, Tom replied, a tension dripping from his voice. You're not the first to try this, nor will you be the last. You can choose different paths. The truth of those words hung heavily, suspended in the air. As the bravado of the group dwindled, a flicker of humanity surfaced in the intruders' eyes. They were men just like Tom, fighting their own battles, struggling through the murky waters of life. But life didn't have to take this turn, did it? Each one had the option to walk away, to choose purpose over desperation. "Listen, we didn't mean any real harm," the leader stammered, backing up slightly. Tom could sense doubt creeping in, feel the tension easing, only to be bolstered by a solemn understanding of their plight. "Maybe you didn't mean to," Tom said, his tone shifting from defensive to something more compassionate. "But you came here to threaten a man in his barn." For a moment, nothing moved. The seconds stretched, filled with the silent exchange of lost dreams and broken paths. This farm had known hardship, but it had also been a home, and within its walls, courage flowed like lifeblood. Another intruder asked, wariness lurking in his voice. With careful deliberation, Tom took a breath, allowing a moment to gather all thoughts. "You walk out that door and you leave your purpose behind." Tom's words seemed to anchor into their hesitant hearts. How many of them had been handed lifetimes of struggle? The psychological weight of knowing what it is to survive without support reverberated, sparking the realization that choices carved deeper than just roads, they shaped identities. Their eyes shifted, glancing at one another, hope and doubt ping-ponged back and forth. It felt unreal that something so small could alter the path of these intruders, but it could. They were mere humans trying to survive in an unforgiving world. The tension began to dissolve like mist under the rising sun, the shadows creeping back into corners as confusion turned into contemplation. Slowly, like waves receding, the intruders pulled back their aggression. They were grappling with the existential weight of the choices that had led them here, and it resonated within each of them. "Thank you," the leader finally muttered, eyes cast down, shame brewing beneath the surface. And one by one, they began to back out of the barn, leaving behind the burdens they had carried, traces of humanity rekindled. As the barn door creaked and the last intruder slipped out into the night, Tom felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. With the hammer still in his grip, he realized that fear and courage often danced in a delicate balance, and sometimes compassion could turn the tide of a life just beginning to slip away. He stood alone in the soft, fading light, heart racing, feeling raw yet strangely fortified. Life would not stop throwing curveballs, he knew that. But tonight, he had defended not just his barn, but had helped a few souls emerge from the darkness, rekindling a flicker of hope. In that silent, steadfast barn, Farmer Tom understood better than most. Sometimes, strength doesn't come from the tools at hand, but from the resolve to forge a future filled with understanding and empathy. Against all odds, they had made it through, and beneath that rustic roof, humanity prevailed even on the darkest night. The wind howled like a wolf in the night, but inside the barn, it was an oasis of calm. Farmer Henry Miles adjusted his straw hat, sweat trickling down his temple as he worked diligently, preparing for the long winter ahead. His calloused hands moved with purpose, stacking bales of hay and organizing tools, an age-old ritual that grounded him. The scent of hay mixed with the earthy smell of the barn, wrapping him in warmth and familiarity. But the stillness didn't last. Suddenly, a thunderous crash ripped through the night. The barn door flew open, splintering against the wooden beams, and shadows poured in like a dark tide. Intruders' 5 figures cloaked in dark clothing stormed into his sanctuary. Their footsteps echoed ominously, drowning out the gentle rustling of the barn's inhabitants. Fear shot through Henry like an ice-cold dagger. His heart pounded in his chest as he instinctively reached for the iron crowbar propped against the wall, an ancient tool for ancient problems. Just days ago, he had discussed security with his good neighbor, Betty. Little did he know how seriously those words would matter. "Get on the ground," one of the intruders barked, the voice a sneer filled with authority. The leader of the ragtag group stood tall, but beneath the bravado, Henry sensed vulnerability, a desperation that often comes with bad choices. Instinct kicked in, propelling Henry into action. He shouted, raising the crowbar. Though the initial wave of fear surged through him, he masked it with a powerful wave of defiance. He knew the terrain better than they ever could. He had spent years learning the ins and outs of this barn, crafting it into more than just a building. It was part of him. The leader brandished a flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, revealing the faces of his crew, each painted in panic and bravado. There was something feral lurking behind their eyes, a need born of desperation. Adrenaline flooded the air like a live wire, and moments felt like hours as the standoff began. Henry demanded, lowering the crowbar slightly but remaining defensive. "Messy?" The question hung in the air, thick with bravado, but beneath it, Henry detected insecurity, a chink in their armor. Desperation breeds recklessness, he thought, and these intruders were no exception. With swift determination, Henry turned to confront the reality inside him, the years spent laboring on this land and the sacrifices made countless times over. And that's when a calculated plan began to form. "Listen, if it's money you want, I can help," he said, voice steady but compassionate. "Take what little I have inside the house." The gang exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. They hadn't prepared for this kind of response. Henry could see them reevaluating their approach. "If you want to get out of here alive, look around," he pressed on. "This barn can give you shelter. The night's only going to get colder." The intruders hesitated, the weight of Henry's words pressing down upon them. They were young, maybe even barely out of their teens, yet their faces were marred by the shadows of bad decisions. Henry sensed their fear. They were cornered animals, lost and desperate, not criminals looking to wreak havoc. Just then, one of them, a woman with wild eyes, spoke up. "What do you know about our lives? You don't get to lecture us." Her voice cracked, teetering on the edge of anger and pain, and it hit Henry hard. He recognized that same pain in his own life, struggles that built walls too tall to see over. "In this barn," he began softly, lowering the crowbar, "I built my life from the ground up. Every nail, every piece of wood, filled with sweat and tears. I get it, life can push you into corners you never wanted." His voice resonated against the wooden walls as vulnerability painted his words. He had shared his story, the joy, the sorrow, the love from family and friends, those moments that shaped him not into just a farmer, but into a man willing to stand tall when the world pushed back. The leader shook his head, visibly flustered. "We're not giving up." "Money can buy temporary comforts," Henry replied, his voice steady and unwavering, "but you're missing the real treasure, something you won't find in a wallet: respect, trust, a good night's sleep." And in that moment, an unexpected shift occurred. It was as if the thick air parted slightly, allowing a pocket of understanding to embed itself in the barn. Henry just needed to hold on long enough for them to see the truth he had learned: facing struggle was a part of life, even in the endless cycle of farming. Another gang member laughed, the tension easing ever so slightly. "I don't care about being wise," Henry shot back. "I care about living with purpose and integrity." He took a breath, letting the silence pulse between them. "But I'm here, willing to listen." Yet the spark of hope he felt was tinged with fear. What if they refused to listen? What if they pushed back? Henry's heart raced, aware of the danger. What would happen if the crowbar was needed after all? Then the leader stepped forward, his posture faltering a bit. "It's easy for you to say. You've had a life. We're struggling out there. I lost my job last week." It was the raw truth that echoed within the barn. Henry could see reflections of himself. He recalled days when the prospects of his farming endeavors seemed distant, even bleak. "I lost seasons to drought and storms, and I know what hopelessness feels like," he replied softly. "But I've also watched the sun rise after the dark." Despite the uncertainty, a glimmer of understanding flickered in the eyes of the intruders. They stood uncertainly, caught between desperation and the unexpected pivot to empathy. One of the younger members sighed heavily, his breath a fog against the cool air. "And if we walk away, it means you walk into a future with better choices. Choices that may take time to bear fruit but are worth it all the same. I've stood in your place, lad." And just as hope hung in the air, swelling with possibility, the barn door creaked, colliding with insistent wind outside. Fear shot through the group again, interrupting their budding connection. "Fine," the leader clenched his fists, voice rising with defiance. The rage bubbled back, spreading through the group like a poorly contained fire, but Henry stood unwavering, his eyes steady. "Do you really want to demolish your chances for a better tomorrow?" Those words hung there, the tension pulsed once again, heavy and stifled. In that moment, Henry's life experience wrapped around the urgency with a burning resolve. He had faced storms before, weathered hardships that seemed insurmountable. He believed in choice. Henry took a step closer, lowering his crowbar towards the ground. "You have the power to reshape your night. You don't have to choose this path. Talk to me." One by one, the gang members exchanged glances, the fear in their eyes mixed with uncertainty. Each of them felt the weight of adult life pressing upon their young shoulders. In their brokenness, perhaps lay a path to redemption. Finally, the woman spoke again. We don't want to hurt you." Her voice faltered, tears springing forth, each word dripping with raw emotion. "I get it," Henry replied, softening. Eventually, the barn fell into a suffocating silence filled with shared vulnerability. The atmosphere shifted. Encased by compassion, the standoff began to wane. Through their collective pain, they stood, not just as intruders, but as people crafted by their circumstances. Henry took a breath, knowing the moment hung in the balance. "You want to stay? Get warm. Help me with the farm. You'll leave tonight with more than you came for," he offered. It felt surreal, yet as the words echoed throughout the wooden structure, the gravity of his proposal pierced through the layers around each heart in that room. There was a chance for new beginnings, for light to break through the endless dark. Slowly, the tension dissolved, shadows lifting from their faces. Hesitation morphed into contemplation, and Henry felt hope crackling in the air. They saw glimpses of their choices unfolding, and maybe, just maybe, they would choose differently. With time, the barn bore witness to a transformation, a young crew of lost souls slowly warming to the contours of shared effort, each realizing they were capable of so much more than taking. Hours passed, and dawn broke just outside the doors, spilling light over countertops and hay. Laughter soon filled the space as they worked together, peeling back layers of struggle to uncover the seeds of new beginnings. Each motion echoed resilience. That night transformed into opportunity, a spark igniting change. In every secured bale, every repaired tool, Henry saw the promise of a better tomorrow, not just for himself, but for them all. As the morning sun poured into the barn, he realized this wasn't just about defending his property or standing tall against fear. It was about opening doors that led to something greater, an understanding that our choices shape both lives and legacies. In that unyielding barn, surrounded by the warmth of connection, they found not only refuge but hope, a chance to mend what had once seemed broken, turning strangers into friends against the backdrop of a story spanning generations. The wind howled like a wolf in the night, but inside the barn it was an oasis of calm. Farmer Henry Miles adjusted his straw hat, sweat trickling down his temple as he worked diligently, preparing for the long winter ahead. His calloused hands moved with purpose, stacking bales of hay and organizing tools, an age-old ritual that grounded him. The scent of hay mixed with the earthy smell of the barn, wrapping him in warmth and familiarity. But the stillness didn't last. Suddenly, a thunderous crash ripped through the night. The barn door flew open, splintering against the wooden beams, and shadows poured in like a dark tide. Intruders, 5 figures cloaked in dark clothing, stormed into his sanctuary. Their footsteps echoed ominously, drowning out the gentle rustling of the barn's inhabitants. Fear shot through Henry like an ice-cold dagger. His heart pounded in his chest as he instinctively reached for the iron crowbar propped against the wall, an ancient tool for ancient problems. Just days ago, he had discussed security with his good neighbor, Betty. Little did he know how seriously those words would matter. "Get on the ground," one of the intruders barked, the voice a sneer filled with authority. The leader of the ragtag group stood tall, but beneath the bravado, Henry sensed vulnerability, a desperation that often comes with bad choices. Adrenaline flooded the air like a live wire, and moments felt like hours as the standoff began. Henry demanded, lowering the crowbar slightly but remaining defensive. Messy, the question hung in the air, thick with bravado, but beneath it, Henry detected insecurity, a chink in their armor. Desperation breeds recklessness, he thought, and these intruders were no exception. With swift determination, Henry turned to confront the reality inside him, the years spent laboring on this land and the sacrifices made countless times over. And that's when a calculated plan began to form. "Listen, if it's money you want, I can help," he said, voice steady but compassionate. "Take what little I have inside the house." The gang exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. They hadn't prepared for this kind of response. Henry could see them reevaluating their approach. "If you want to get out of here alive, look around," he pressed on. "This barn can give you shelter. The night's only going to get colder." The intruders hesitated, the weight of Henry's words pressing down upon them. They were young, maybe even barely out of their teens, yet their faces were marred by the shadows of bad decisions. Henry sensed their fear. They were cornered animals, lost and desperate, not criminals looking to wreak havoc. Just then, one of them, a woman with wild eyes, spoke up. "What do you know about our lives? You don't get to lecture us." Her voice cracked, teetering on the edge of anger and pain, and it hit Henry hard. He recognized that same pain in his own life, struggles that built walls too tall to see over. "In this barn," he began softly, lowering the crowbar, "I built my life from the ground up. Every nail, every piece of wood, filled with sweat and tears. I get it, life can push you into corners you never wanted." His voice resonated against the wooden walls as vulnerability painted his words. He had shared his story, the joy, the sorrow, the love from family and friends, those moments that shaped him not into just a farmer, but into a man willing to stand tall when the world pushed back. The leader shook his head, visibly flustered. "We're not giving up. Money can buy temporary comforts," Henry replied, his voice steady and unwavering, "but you're missing the real treasure, something you won't find in a wallet: respect, trust, a good night's sleep." And in that moment, an unexpected shift occurred. It was as if the thick air parted slightly, allowing a pocket of understanding to embed itself in the barn. Henry just needed to hold on long enough for them to see the truth he had learned: facing struggle was a part of life, even in the endless cycle of farming. Another gang member laughed, the tension easing ever so slightly. "I don't care about being wise," Henry shot back. "I care about living with purpose and integrity." He took a breath, letting the silence pulse between them. "But I'm here, willing to listen." Yet the spark of hope he felt was tinged with fear. What if they refused to listen? What if they pushed back? Henry's heart raced, aware of the danger. What would happen if the crowbar was needed after all? Then the leader stepped forward, his posture faltering a bit. "It's easy for you to say. You've had a life. We're struggling out there. I lost my job last week." It was the raw truth that echoed within the barn. Henry could see reflections of himself. He recalled days when the prospects of his farming endeavors seemed distant, even bleak. "I lost seasons to drought and storms, and I know what hopelessness feels like," he replied softly. "But I've also watched the sun rise after the dark." Despite the uncertainty, a glimmer of understanding flickered in the eyes of the intruders. They stood uncertainly, caught between desperation and the unexpected pivot to empathy. Finally, the woman spoke again. We don't want to hurt you." Her voice faltered, tears springing forth, each word dripping with raw emotion. "I get it," Henry replied, softening. Eventually, the barn fell into a suffocating silence filled with shared vulnerability. The atmosphere shifted. Encased by compassion, the standoff began to wane. Through their collective pain, they stood not just as intruders, but as people crafted by their circumstances. Henry took a breath, knowing the moment hung in the balance. "You want to stay? Get warm, help me with the farm. You'll leave tonight with more than you came for," he offered. It felt surreal, yet as the words echoed throughout the wooden structure, the gravity of his proposal pierced through the layers around each heart in that room. There was a chance for new beginnings, for light to break through the endless dark. Slowly, the tension dissolved, shadows lifting from their faces. The gang members exchanged glances, uncertainty giving way to realization, and Henry felt hope crackling in the air. They saw glimpses of their choices unfolding, and maybe, just maybe, they would choose differently. With time, the barn bore witness to a transformation, a young crew of lost souls slowly warming to the contours of shared effort, each realizing they were capable of so much more than taking. Hours passed, and dawn broke just outside the doors, spilling light over countertops and hay. Laughter soon filled the space as they worked together, peeling back layers of struggle to uncover the seeds of new beginnings. Each motion echoed resilience. That night transformed into opportunity, a spark igniting change. In every secured bale, every repaired tool, Henry saw the promise of a better tomorrow, not just for himself, but for them all. As the morning sun poured into the barn, he realized this wasn't just about defending his property or standing tall against fear. It was about opening doors that led to something greater, an understanding that our choices shape both lives and legacies. In that unyielding barn, surrounded by the warmth of connection, they found not only refuge but hope, a chance to mend what had once seemed broken, turning strangers into friends against the backdrop of a story spanning generations. Hope grew that day not just in crops but within hearts intertwined through the shared soil of understanding. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a silver glow over the sprawling fields of Maple Ridge. The only sounds were the faint rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl, a reminder of the quiet life that Farmer Ben Jenkins had built over decades. As he tightened the last bolt on the tractor, he felt contentment wash over him. The barn was not just where he stored tools and hay, it was a sanctuary, a lifeline woven from years of hard work. Suddenly, an ear-splitting crash shattered the serene night. The barn door, aged yet steadfast, exploded off its hinges. Ben's heart raced as he turned to face the intruders spilling into his world, silhouetted against the moonlight like dark specters bent on destruction. "Get on the ground," boomed a voice that dripped with malice. The intruders, 3 men clad in hooded sweatshirts, advanced like wolves, eyes flashing with a mix of fear and greed. In the chaos of that moment, Ben felt something shift within him. Years of tending to the land, caring for animals, and living in a close-knit community had prepared him for this very encounter, though he never thought it would come to this. Ben quickly scanned the barn, assessing his options. His gaze landed on the heavy shovel leaning against the wall, a tool that had dug more than just holes. It had shaped his life, his identity. Without hesitation, he grabbed it, feeling the weight and importance of the moment settle into his bones. "You boys picked the wrong barn to break into," he said, voice steady but laced with strength he didn't know he possessed. One of the intruders spat, stepping forward, fists clenched like he was about to unleash a storm. The tension was palpable, and beneath the bravado, Ben could sense the desperation in their eyes. They were not seasoned criminals, but young men caught in their own desperate circumstances. It was a reminder of a bygone era when community support was a lifeline, echoing in Ben's mind like a long-forgotten song. "Listen," Ben said, lowering his shovel slightly. "I don't want any trouble. I worked hard for everything in this barn. You think you can take it?" For a fraction of a moment, uncertainty danced in the air. The leader scratched his head, glancing nervously at his companions. Yep, they were scared. One of them, a younger-looking guy with wild hair and eyes shimmering with desperation, broke the uneasy silence. We just need some cash, just some." "I get it," Ben replied, his voice softening. "I really do." His father had always taught him the importance of understanding others, of seeing beyond the surface. The leader shouted, his bravado slipping. Ben held his ground, realizing that confrontation could spiral out of control in an instant. He'd seen it too many times. Fear often led to unthinkable choices. "I'm not a rich man, boys, but I can help you." The leader's eyes narrowed. "You think we need charity?" "No, not pity, just an opportunity," Ben said, taking a step closer, shovel still in hand but now held more defiantly than threateningly. "I know you've faced hardships I might not understand, but stealing won't make it better." His words hung in the air, and for a fleeting moment their facade began to crack. He could see the internal battle waging within them, the clash between pride and desperation. It made him think of the time he had to face the brutal winter storm, and the only choice was to keep pushing forward, even when he wanted to throw in the towel. The younger one shouted defiantly. "I do," Ben countered, lowering his shovel again. "I lost my crops to drought last year, had to make decisions that hurt me deep down." As he spoke, he could see the glimmer of recognition in their eyes. Maybe they had never been seen in this light before. Maybe he was awakening something buried beneath their anger and fear. "Just let us take what we need," the leader pleaded, vulnerability seeping through the cracks in his bravado. "And what happens after that?" Ben took a step closer, allowing himself to connect with their shared humanity. "I've struggled too, and I'm still here." It was at that moment that the younger man broke down, his facade crumbling like dry earth. "I didn't mean for it to come to this," he cried. "I lost my job and bills are piling up." Ben's heart ached for him. This was more than a clash between a farmer and intruders. It was a gathering of soul-worn individuals trying to navigate the unpredictability of life. He remembered his own journey, the moments when he felt lost, like there was nowhere to turn. "Let me help you," Ben said softly, eyes unwavering. "I have work to be done on the farm. It isn't glamorous and it won't solve everything overnight, but it's honest work." The leader hesitated, glancing at his comrades, who exchanged silent messages with one another. The internal struggle raged on, and he could feel the tension crackling in the air, a mix between something primal and that flicker of hope. The third intruder scoffed, shifting uncomfortably as he remained uncertain, but Ben remained firm. "No, I won't let anyone walk all over me, but I also won't turn my back on a human being in need." Their eyes softened slightly, as if they were truly weighing their choices. Ben could sense the walls gradually crumbling, replaced by a space of potential and connection. "You may think you have no choice now, but you can change that. Your lives weren't meant to be defined by this moment," Ben interjected gently. "How about this stay the night, catch your breath?" The leader's shoulders sagged, uncertainty blending with curiosity. He glanced back at his friends. "Yes, in fact," Ben chuckled lightly, "I could use some extra hands around here." Slowly, the tension in the room shifted. Eyes that once gleamed with anger now flickered with the faint spark of hope. "I don't know," the leader muttered. Ben's gaze remained steady, a silent promise forged in years of hard labor and resilience. Sometimes people help because they remember being lost. To his surprise, the leader took a deep breath. All right, the decision hung in the air like a fragile thread, a choice that could either weave destruction or connect lives. As Ben led the intruders deeper into the barn, he felt a powerful mix of relief and trepidation. The line had shifted, and new possibilities swirled around them. As the sun began to dip beyond the horizon, casting golden hues across the barn, Ben and the intruders began their work. It was tough physical labor, but the air was lighter now. Laughter occasionally bubbled up, weaving a tapestry of connection that humankind often built to withstand hardship. The barn that had once been a battleground transformed into a stage for camaraderie. They laughed as they adjusted hay bales and fixed old machinery, sharing snippets of their lives, the dreams they once had, the storms they faced, and how they ended up here. With each passing hour, new layers peeled away, each man revealing his vulnerabilities. The leader, who initially appeared so fearsome, shared stories of a childhood spent on the farm before tragedy stole it away. The wild-haired man described the dreams he once held of becoming a teacher, an aspiration faded behind the weight of bills. As the stars shone above, the barn glowed warmly, a newfound sense of family wrapping around them. Each man felt less like an intruder and more like a person seeking a second chance. They shared meals, laughter, and stories long into the night, leaving behind the masks that had shielded their hearts. When dawn broke the next day, it wasn't just sunlight filtering through the barn. It was opportunity, a sense of purpose that infused life back into each man standing together. They had stepped beyond loss and desperation, guided into newfound resolve. "Today marks a new beginning for all of us," Ben said, standing in the center of the barn. The intruders nodded slowly, a wave of determination washing over them. It was a shared commitment to navigate life through hands joined in labor. That morning, the barn sang with the sound of laughter, diggers working the fields, and the rhythm of life returning. Each task they tackled became a testament to their commitment to rise above their pasts. Months later, weeks of hard work turned into paid jobs, and Ben saw the community pull together. The intruders had transformed. The leader continued to work the land, eventually becoming a mentor to others struggling to find their footing. The wild-haired young man, who once sought easy money, rediscovered his passion for education, helping others in need. In time, the barn that once stood as a symbol of fear became a beacon of hope. Neighbors would come by, witnessing the transformation of lives often untouched by kindness. And so, as the seasons changed, the stories intertwined like roots in the soil, becoming part of something beautiful. Each one learned that life isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving together, embracing the light of understanding in the darkest times. In that warm space, surrounded by friends that had once teetered on the edge of chaos, there thrived an unwavering spirit, a reminder of how compassion can reshape the world, one decision at a time. As Ben watched the sun set over Maple Ridge once more, he couldn't help but smile. Life wasn't perfect, but together they were carving out a path worth walking. The night was silent, the kind of silence that wraps around you like a thick blanket, soothing yet foreboding at the same time. Farmer Sam Bennett stood in the soft glow of the barn's single light bulb, examining his tools. The familiar smells of hay and wood filled the air. It felt like home. But that night, home would soon become a battleground. Suddenly, a crash shattered the tranquility, the sound of wood splintering and metal clattering to the ground. The barn door flew off its hinges, revealing three figures silhouetted against the moonlight, their faces obscured by masks. Their presence sent a jolt of adrenaline through Sam. Survival instincts kicked in, a primal reflex rooted in every fiber of his being. He had seen the news reports, stories of local farms being raided, their equipment stolen, their livestock threatened. People warned him to be cautious, to prepare for the worst, and he did. He had spent long nights securing every entry, reinforcing windows, and investing in lighting. but nothing could quite prepare him for the raw menace that burst into his sanctuary. On the ground, one of the figures shouted, their voice crackling with authority, though Sam detected a tremor beneath it. The smallest of the trio stepped forward, fingers twitching nervously on a crowbar as he scanned the dim barn. Sam challenged, holding his ground. In his hand, he clasped a heavy wrench, the kind that had tightened bolts and fixed machinery during long, tireless days. It was an extension of his will, a tool that had built his life, and now it felt like the last line of defense. "Shut up, just hand over what you've got," the leader barked, his bravado failing to mask the underlying fear. "Listen," Sam said, lowering his voice, "you don't have to do this. I worked hard for everything in this barn." The leader struggled to maintain his composure, eyes darting around nervously as if weighing his next move. The panic in the room thrummed like electricity. In that moment, Sam realized these intruders were not the hardened criminals he had anticipated. They were scared, wild-eyed, and desperate. It reminded him of the winter years ago when the snowfall had buried his crops and left him on the edge of despair. The frustration, the hunger, the fear of losing everything, you could see it mirrored in their eyes. "Just give us the cash," a voice from the back urged, quivering with anxiety. Sam echoed, shaking his head. "You're already here, breaking into my barn. You think acting tough is going to get you what you want." The leader stepped closer, and Sam could see the panic begin to surface clearly. This wasn't just a robbery. It was a cry for help wrapped in anger and misguidance. "I know what it's like to have nothing, to feel trapped in a world that's closing in on you," Sam replied, feeling the wrench grip tighter in his hand. But this uncertainty flickered in the group. Each man revealed bits of vulnerability in their eyes, pieces of a story that had driven them to this moment. They weren't just intruders, they were lost, battling their own demons. In a world that often felt like it had turned its back on them, this night was merely a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of control. "Let's go," one of the intruders muttered, voice barely above a whisper, grasping the shoulder of the leader, urging caution. "Shut up," the leader shouted, but even he seemed to feel the gravity of what they were doing. Sam sensed the ebbing tension, their fear, their doubt. They weren't hardened criminals, they were scared young men who had made the wrong choices. And every second that passed weighed heavier as he considered what could happen next. At that moment, their lives hung in a delicate balance, much like the crops he had tended through storms and droughts. "Look, I can help you," Sam offered, surprising even himself. The words slipped from his lips, ignited by an instinct to bridge the chasm of fear and anger that stretched between them. "Let's put the weapons down and talk this through." A moment of stunned silence hung in the air, then the leader scoffed. "Help us? You think we're going to fall for that? It's not a trick," Sam said, desperate but calm. "I'm offering you a way out, an alternative to this path of destruction. You're not alone, even if it feels that way." He gestured toward the shelves stocked with tools, the machinery that had become the backbone of his life. But it wasn't just the equipment he wanted to share, it was the unyielding spirit of resilience that built them all. A voice flickered from the back, the uncertainty creeping back in. "Because I know what it means to fight back against despair," Sam admitted, his voice softening. "Years ago I lost everything, crops, livestock, hope, but I rebuilt this place. I know how hard it is, and I know there's a way to rise from the ashes." For a moment, he could see the shadows slowly retreating from their faces. The vulnerability within him sparked a connection, a flicker of understanding that only those who have hit rock bottom could truly appreciate. "We used to have it all," the leader admitted, a tinge of bitterness in his voice. "I do know," Sam acknowledged, locking eyes with each of them in turn, "but stealing from me won't change your situation. It'll only make things worse. You think my life was easy." As Sam spoke, the sound of the world outside faded, the creaking barn, the whispering wind through the cracks in the wood. And here, in this battle of wills, vulnerability danced between them, a fragile thread connecting their hearts. "Maybe we really should leave," one of the younger intruders said, questioning the shaky path before them, glancing toward the exit. "No," the leader's resolve was faltering. He could feel it slipping through his fingers like sand. "What we need is to find our footing again," Sam interjected, his voice calm yet firm. "You can help me on the farm, I'll pay you. Even if it's not much, you'll earn it." The murmurs of dissent began to quiet, uncertainty turning into contemplation. Maybe, just maybe, there was another way, a chance for redemption that didn't involve theft and violence. The darker instincts that had propelled them here began to flicker like the dim light bulb illuminating the barn. The leader was breathing heavily, eyes darting back and forth. "Absolutely," Sam affirmed. "We can tackle this together, and I promise it'll be worth it." As the leader looked at his friends, something shifted in the air. The conversations of the past collided with hopes for the future. They had come here seeking something, even if it was misguided. Perhaps they were all lost souls searching for their way back. "All right," the leader finally said, resolve softening into vulnerability. With those words, the storm that had brewed in the barn began to dissipate. Sam felt a wave of relief, not just for himself, but for the young men who had stepped back from the edge of self-destruction. Everything seemed to tug and shift like a tide drawn back toward the shore, a chance for renewal. Together, they replaced fear with labor. Sam led them toward the various tasks that had long awaited his attention, fixing fences, tending to animals, clearing fallen hay. As they worked side by side, laughter began to lace through the air, breaking the tension that had once threatened to consume them all. Days turned into weeks. The barn that once held the memories of fear began to echo with the sounds of hard work and camaraderie. Sam taught them about farming, about commitment to the land, showing them how to nurture life instead of taking it. They engaged in conversations about their past, their dreams, the fears they had carried, and slowly their trust grew. The leader, whose name turned out to be Jake, found solace in the rhythm of farm work. The younger ones began to unearth their own aspirations, a desire for education, for dignity, for purpose. Each day spent working the land soothed the raw edges of their experiences, forming bonds that had seemed impossible just a few weeks before. As Sam watched their transformation, he couldn't help but reflect on his own journey, the times he felt so alone, the people who reached out to him when he needed it the most. It was a reminder that the world often felt heavy, but if you looked closely enough, there were lightnings to be found even in the darkest storms. One evening, as the sun set in a burst of crimson and gold, Sam gathered the young men around a makeshift table in the barn. They echoed, smiles blooming on their faces. In that moment, the connection was palpable. They had not only reclaimed their dignity, they had redefined their purpose. The barn, once threatened by shadows, had become a symbol of resilience, an emblem of change. As the nights turned into months, the community began to notice the change, welcoming the young men back not as intruders, but as part of the family. They became known for their hard work, their willingness to lend a hand, and their invigorating spirit. Later that year, at the annual county fair, Sam stood proudly beside Jake and the others, who had forged a new path amid the remnants of despair. As the sun set behind them, he smiled, knowing that they had found hope not just in the fields, but also within themselves. In that barn, they had shared heartache and healing, breaking the chains that had once threatened to hold them down. They had transformed their lives, replaced fear with compassion, and filled the world with understanding. It was a powerful reminder that sometimes all it takes to heal is a little bit of empathy, a flicker of light cutting through the darkness. As they cheered with laughter and joy, they realized the true treasure was not just about what was taken, but what could be grown and nurtured together, side by side. The barn was more than just a building. It had become a sanctuary of hope. The moon hung low and heavy in the sky, casting a pale glow over the sprawling fields of Maplewood Farm. Inside the barn, the air was thick with the sweet, earthy scent of hay and the distant rustle of livestock settling for the night. Farmer Jack Lawson wiped his brow, satisfied with the day's work. He had always taken pride in being prepared for anything, from harsh winters to unexpected storms. But that night, his resolve would be tested in ways he never imagined. A sudden crash shattered the peaceful night. The barn door burst open, wood splintering and falling as three figures barreled inside. Shadows danced against the walls, chaotic and jarring. Instinct kicked in, sending a jolt of adrenaline through Jack's veins. He quickly scanned the barn, breath quickening. "Get on the ground." A voice cut through the darkness, sharp and commanding. Jack's heart raced as he recognized the danger. The intruders, all men, wild-eyed and fueled by desperation, stood ready to impose their will. Jack demanded, standing tall with a pitchfork gripped tightly in his hands. This barn was his sanctuary, built from years of hard work and sweat. He wouldn't let anyone tear it down. "Shut up, old man," the leader sneered, turning a flickering flashlight toward Jack. In that moment, the light reflected off the steely determination in Jack's eyes. He didn't waver. He had faced storms before. Jack asked, keeping his voice steady. He could sense something simmering beneath their bravado, fear, perhaps panic. Desperation often pushed people to do reckless things. "Money," the leader shouted, his voice strained. Jack took a moment to assess the situation. He had seen too many families suffer the consequences of fear and desperation. It wasn't just a robbery, it was a cry for help wrapped in anger. "Look," he said, lowering the pitchfork slightly, "you don't have to do this." One of the intruders asked, uncertainty creeping into his tone. "I've had my share of hard times," Jack began, locking eyes with each of them. "I know what it's like to feel cornered. When I lost my crops to that storm last year, I had to dig deep to find a way through, but trust me, stealing from me won't solve anything." The leader shifted uncomfortably. Jack could see the tension loosening as his words hung in the air. It was a gamble to appeal to their humanity, but he felt it was worth a shot. "I can help you," he offered, surprising even himself. "You need cash, I can give you work." The atmosphere in the barn shifted, and for a moment disbelief replaced the tension. The leader asked, incredulous. "I am," Jack replied, sensing their hesitation. "You think I'm some kind of rich farmer? I've had my struggles, but I'm still standing." Another intruder questioned, glancing at the others. His voice quivered, fear creeping back in. Jack pressed. He felt a rush of hope as he saw their resolve begin to crack, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. The leader shouted, but his voice lacked conviction. Desperation had driven them here, but Jack's sincerity was slowly cracking their tough exterior. "Listen, boys," he said, taking a step closer. "I know life can feel like a relentless storm sometimes, but you don't have to face it alone. Focus all this energy on something useful. Let's turn this around. You want easy cash." For a moment, time stretched thin. Could it really be this simple? Hope battled with fear as the intruders exchanged wary glances. "I'm not falling for this," the leader finally stammered, but his bravado was fading fast. Jack could see it. He could see it in the way their shoulders slumped just a bit, in the way the wildness in their eyes began to shift. "I'll give you a meal," Jack continued. "Work for a couple of days. You don't want to be known as thieves. You want to make something of yourselves, don't you?" "That's easy for you to say," the younger intruder snapped bitterly. "No, I don't," Jack admitted, surprising them again. "But I do know fear and frustration. When I couldn't make ends meet after the storm, I didn't turn to stealing. I reached out for support and found it in my community." As Jack spoke, the words resonated, dropping like seeds into fertile ground, igniting change amidst their conflict. The leader asked, voice quieter now, uncertainty creeping in. "I have fences to fix and animals to care for," Jack replied. "You'd be surprised at how good it feels to put your hands to work instead of letting them destroy." For a moment, the tension hung heavy, like a storm cloud poised to break. The leader's resolve crumbled further, his eyes softened as he glanced at his companions. He asked, barely above a whisper. "We could at least check it out," the younger one replied, and just like that, the line between predator and prey began to blur. Jack felt the growing shift within them, like the first signs of spring after a long winter. "You're making the right choice," he reassured them. Tentatively, the trio lowered their weapons and took a step toward Jack. He felt a sense of relief wash over him, but there was still much work to be done. Days passed, and the barn that had once echoed with hostility transformed into a sanctuary of cooperation. Jack led the young men through tasks that utilized their strength in spirit, repairing fences, feeding livestock, and mending machinery. They learned the value of hard work, the satisfaction that came from sweat and effort. But it wasn't just about the labor. In those moments, they exchanged stories about their struggles, their dreams, and what led them to take that reckless path. Jack listened patiently, offering wisdom where he could. He remembered a time when he felt lost, unsure of his next step, and how he had forged ahead with the support of his community. As the days blended into weeks, the young men found purpose and, along with it, a sense of camaraderie. They laughed while working, swapped stories, and in time, Jack watched as they began to stand taller as confidence grew in their eyes. Jake, the leader, said one evening as they took a break, wiping sweat from their foreheads. "Of course," Jack replied, intrigued. "Why'd you help us? You had every reason to turn us in," he said, a hint of curiosity breaking through his tough exterior. Jack took a deep breath, glancing around at the barn filled with the sounds of work and connection. "Because we're all human," he stated simply. "We all make mistakes, but it's what we choose to do afterward that defines us. I wouldn't be who I am without the mistakes I've made. You guys are better than this moment." The vulnerability in Jack's voice struck a chord within Jake. The boy who had burst into the barn with violence and aggression was realizing that he had the potential for something greater. Days turned into weeks, and soon they weren't just working together, they had become a family. One afternoon, while taking a break, Jack handed Jake a worn-out journal. "Write down your thoughts, track your progress, set goals," he encouraged. Jake looked at the journal, then back at Jack, clarity shifting into focus. "I think I will," he said, a spark igniting within him. As summer rolled in, the barn transformed into a vibrant center of activity. They hosted community gatherings, farm-to-table dinners, and local produce markets. The trio began to draw in the community, showing that misjudgment could lead to redemption, a path no one expected. The barn, once a target of theft, had turned into a beacon of hope, drawing in lost souls searching for a second chance. Jack smiled as he watched Jake and his friends work side by side with neighbors. One evening, after a particularly bountiful day, Jack gathered the group together. The setting sun painted the barn in gold hues, illuminating their faces as they shared their accomplishments. It was a family celebration, but more than that, it was a testament to resilience. "To new beginnings," Jack said, raising his glass filled with homemade lemonade from the farm. The others echoed, laughter filling the air, warping into joy. As the night wore on, Jack felt a warmth in his heart, realizing that true success wasn't measured in materials, but in the relationships forged in moments of compassion and resilience. They had all created something together, and that something was now flourishing, but the journey wasn't without its challenges. There were setbacks, times when they felt weighed down by past choices clamoring for attention, but each time Jack reminded them of their progress. "Every setback is a setup for a comeback," he told them. As seasons changed, so did the lives of those young men. Their stories began to spread beyond the barn, igniting a fire within the community. They turned their lives around, becoming mentors to others who felt lost. They began coordinating initiatives, community cleanups, and workshops aimed at helping others change their trajectory. Every time Jack looked at the barn, he felt pride swell within him. It had transformed from a place of fear into a sanctuary of hope, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, compassion could pave the way for a brighter future. In time, Jake stood as a pillar in the community, becoming a voice for those who felt unheard. The boy who had once cowered behind a mask was now articulating dreams of change and resilience. He became a symbol proof that transformation was possible, that darkness could be overcome with light. One fateful autumn evening, as the leaves crunched underfoot and the sun began its descent, Jack reflected on the journey that had unfolded. It was more than just about a barn, more than merely standing up to intruders. It was about the power of community and redemption, the ability to rise from the depths of despair into something beautiful. Gathered around a fire one last time before winter's embrace, the warmth infused the air with camaraderie and shared accomplishment. Jack smiled, watching the community, a tapestry woven from individual stories. "We did this together," he said softly, voice choked with emotion. "Yes, we did," Jake replied, determination glinting in his eyes. As laughter erupted once again and stories flowed around the flickering flames, Jack felt a profound sense of peace wash over him. The barn wasn't just a building, it had become a sanctuary where hope thrived, a testament that even in times of darkness, light could be found. Together, they had built something far greater than walls of wood and nails. They had forged a bond of resilience, growing stronger with each day. The journey had begun with fear, but it had blossomed into a life filled with promise, reminding everyone that healing can emerge even from the most chaotic of beginnings. The storm had been brewing for days. Dark clouds rolled in like an army, thick and menacing, their low rumbles occasionally pierced by flashes of lightning that lit up the night sky. When the worst of it hit, the wind howled outside, shaking the old barn on Maple Ridge Farm. Inside, Farmer George Tanner was putting the final touches on his preparations. He felt a knot of unease deep in his stomach, knowing that this storm wasn't just about rain and wind. For George, a fourth-generation farmer, every storm brought with it a sense of responsibility, not only to his crops but to the land and the home he cherished. He had spent years reinforcing the barn, a shelter built not just to hold hay and equipment, but to protect his livelihood. With each gust that rattled the doors, George reminded himself to stay vigilant. But nothing, not the gnashing wind or the sheets of rain pounding at the barn doors, could prepare him for the chaos that was about to unfold. Suddenly, shouts broke through the storm's roar. "Open up!" A voice bellowed from outside, sharp and demanding. George froze, his heart racing. He instinctively clasped the old wrench he kept on the workbench, a tool that had seen its share of wear. But this was no ordinary repair only a farmer could fix. This was an invasion. The barn doors swung open with a violent crash, and in rushed three shadowy figures, drenched and wild-eyed. They were drenched, frantic, driven by desperation that can only come from the darkest places. George tensed, holding the wrench tightly in his hand. He demanded, voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Money," the leader of the group shouted, his breath heavy and frantic, panic radiating from him as he brandished a crowbar. George recognized the familiar look in their eyes. He had seen it before in the faces of those who'd lost everything. He yelled back, trying to inject reason into the madness. "This is my home," the leader spat, stepping closer. It was an intimidation tactic, but George sensed cracks in their bravado. Walking down this path didn't just affect him, they were risking their lives too. The other two intruders shifted uneasily, glancing at each other as if they were searching for a way out. The noise of the storm outside suddenly seemed quieter, the tension inside the barn amplifying every heartbeat. The younger one urged, voice trembling, "Because this is a family business, my life's work," George replied, taking a step forward. "If you want cash, fine, but there's nothing here you'll find worth stealing. What you really need is a chance." The leader hesitated. Over the years, George had learned that desperation could blind people to reason, but there was a flicker of something meaningful in the young man's eyes. "Talk. I can give you a job," George offered, surprising even himself. "Instead of taking what little I have, come work for me. You'll earn something worthwhile without destroying lives." The leader paused, the tension in his body relaxing just a little. "I think you want a way out," George replied, his heart thundering in his chest. "You want to feel proud of something, don't you? Life has a way of pushing us into dark corners, but that doesn't mean we have to stay there. I lost everything once too." The older man's gaze softened, uncertainty swirling in his eyes. The other two shifted again, caught between fear and the faint possibility of hope. The younger intruder pressed, his bravado waning. "Because I want to see you rise from this," George said firmly. "You're better than this moment." Outside, the storm picked up again, wind howling like a living entity. But inside the barn, the tempest was not just the weather, it was a confrontation of dreams and desperation. George stood ready to turn the tide, eyeing the intruders as the sound of rain pounding made the barn feel like a refuge from the chaos outside. Somewhere deep within, the intruders were grappling with the weight of their choices. The leader muttered, doubt still clouding his logic. "I am," George replied, steadying himself, feeling the weight of a pivotal decision teetering on the edge of the storm. The younger one asked quietly. "Life could change and you could find a better way to live," George spoke, the passion building in his chest. A long silence followed, the storm raging louder outside. The leader searched the faces of his companions, uncertainty skimming the surface. Maybe. The tension hung like fog in the air, thick and stifling as if the barn itself was waiting for a decision. But moments stretched and George felt the urgency. He knew how quickly desperation could lead back to violence. "Let's talk about it," George said, hoping to keep the momentum shifted away from chaos. Slowly, the leader lowered the crowbar. They were still on edge, but the decision marked a turning point. "Okay, we'll hear you out." "I'm not," George interjected, cutting off the thin thread of intimidation hanging between them. As the rain continued to lash against the barn, the atmosphere transformed. Conversations shifted from hostility and fear to an exchange of aspirations. George spoke of his farm, of the life he'd built through trials, and slowly the intruders began to share fragments of their stories. The chaos outside became a soundtrack to their shared vulnerabilities. The leader, whose name was Jake, spoke about losing his job, of bad breaks, and how life had pushed him into this situation feeling trapped in an endless cycle of despair. The younger intruder was Tim, a boy who had always dreamed of becoming a chef but felt the weight of abandonment pull him toward choices he never wanted to make. Sharing their struggles made the world outside the barn seem increasingly distant, and with every story, bridges began to build. George took a breath, feeling a surge of determination coursing through him. "Listen, I've been where you are. I remember nights spent worrying if I could pay my bills after the storm hit. But you have something I didn't have back then, a chance to change it all right now." Jake nodded slowly, but just as George felt the tide turning, he heard a loud crack outside, followed by the unmistakable sounds of footsteps approaching. The three intruders tensed once more. Tim asked, eyes wide with fear. "A storm," George said, trying to keep calm. Heavy footsteps creaked closer, and the barn door rattled. George had spent years reinforcing this space against winds and floods, but never against trespassers who might come to take back what they felt belonged to them. This was different. Suddenly, the sense of safety felt fragile. "Quick," George commanded, urgency racing against the thunder rumbling through the sky. He grabbed a nearby pitchfork and motioned for the intruders to grab tools, blending them into the shadows of the barn. The storm wasn't the only danger they faced. Jake showed hesitation, eyes darting around the barn like a wounded animal. "They'll see a farmer defending his land," George whispered, heart pounding. "Stick close." The intruders, with adrenaline flushing through their veins, crouched low, grabbing tools and tucking themselves into the far corner of the barn. The door creaked open and a man stepped inside. He was drenched, mud caking his boots, eyes scanning the interior. He shouted, a crooked grin plastered on his face. It was a face George recognized, an old rival from the neighboring farm, someone who had once tried to cheat him out of half a harvest. His arrival threatened to derail everything George had just built with the intruders. George warned, gripping the pitchfork tightly. "But it does," Hank smirked, leaning against a post, clearly enjoying the power trip. "What a sight. Look at you, standing with your precious tools, about to lose everything. You think they'll help you?" The storm outside roared in tandem with Hank's threats, filling the barn with an overwhelming tension, and just like that, every ounce of camaraderie built with the intruders started to unravel. Jake yelled from the shadows, and George felt the fear surge. "Looks like you found some friends," Hank taunted. "How quaint, but newsflash, a farmer's job is to protect his land. Aren't you supposed to be working?" George shouted, the anger bubbling up. "You don't want to do this." Hank replied, teeth bared in a vicious smile. Behind George, he could feel the intruders shifting uneasily, uncertainty creeping back into their minds. Would they believe that they could find a new path, or would they succumb to the weight of their fears? "Looks like they're just scared little boys under all that bravado," Hank laughed, mocking their struggles. With a surge of determination, George took a step forward, pitchfork gleaming in the flickering light, grounded in the belief of who he could be and who he wanted them to become. "You don't get to define them, Hank." The words echoed through the barn, heavy with meaning, and the atmosphere shifted once more. Despite Hank's taunts, George felt the intruders behind him solidifying their choice, a bond forged not just in survival, but in understanding. "Maybe we are scared," Jake shouted, bravely stepping from the shadows. "But we're more than what you see. We're not thieves." In that moment, the risk of stepping forward turned into defiance, a joint stand against the chaos. George felt pride blossom in his chest as he witnessed their courage to fight against adversity. Hank's grin faltered slightly, disbelief wrinkling his brow. "You think you can change just like that?" "No," Jake said firmly. "We're not nothing. We're finding our way through this." As the storm raged on outside, the confrontation escalated. George knew they were at a critical junction. This moment would define more than just their evening in the barn. It held the weight of their futures. But just as the tension reached its peak, another loud crack echoed from outside the barn, and this time it was different. Both George and Hank turned to look, the sound more thunderous than thunder itself. Before anyone could react, a flash of light blazed through the barn door, illuminating their faces. Tim whispered, eyes wide. Something had changed. The storm was building, swirling chaos around them, making it impossible to discern the difference between treachery and survival. George shouted, gripping the pitchfork tighter, heart racing. But they couldn't anticipate the collision that awaited them. The storm raging outside was merely a mirror to the turmoil unfurling within. And as tensions surged, the questions loomed larger. Were they ready to fight for their lives, their dignity, and their futures? The air thickened with uncertainty, every heartbeat amplifying the stakes. The line between friend and foe blurred, reality teetered dangerously on the precipice of chaos, and with one decisive moment, everything could unravel. They stood poised on the brink, gripping tightly to hope, ready to face the storm as one, even as they prepared for the unexpected to come crashing in.